The night cracked open with a scream she couldn't finish. The mask ripped from her face as the ground shook beneath the burning sky. Air. Thin, sharp, metallic, slashed into her lungs, stealing breath faster than panic could rise. And then, shadows. Heavy footsteps. A figure built from light and armor leaning over her, watching her gasp like something dying. Why wasn't he killing her? Why did his own breath sound like fire drowning? Why did his own breath sound like fire? Who designed a world where both sides suffocated on the same air? She tried to crawl away, but the sky erupted again, and he dragged her beneath the wreckage, shielding her from a blast that should have ended them both. The world hissed around them, war machines searching, hunting, scanning. Two enemies trapped inches apart, both choking on the very thing meant to keep them alive. Even in terror, she felt the strange truth. Their breaths were broken in the same way. When silence finally returned, she stared at him and wondered. A thought sharp enough to cut through fear. If the air wasn't theirs, then who stole it? A question lingered in the ruin, soft and heavy as dust settling. Sometimes, the thing that saves you isn't mercy or fate, but someone just as lost as you. The silence after the explosion felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath along with them. She pressed a hand to her chest, forcing air in tiny burning sips, while he watched her with a strange mix of fear and restraint. He wasn't moving to strike. He wasn't calling for backup. He looked lost, as if he didn't know which instinct to obey. Outside, metal groaned and echoed, drawing closer with every second. She sensed it then, the quiet truth beneath all the noise. He was hurting too, trapped in a world that rejected his lungs as fiercely as it rejected hers, without a mask. For the first time, she wondered if survival meant fighting him or trusting him. His breathing grew harsher, each inhale scraping through him like broken glass. She recognized the rhythm, pain, rising fast. Instinct overrode fear. She reached for her damaged mask and tried to repair the cracked valve with shaking hands. He watched, confused, then alarmed, as sparks flashed across the sky outside. Neither of them could stay here. Their enemies were combing the ruins inch by inch, and soon this tiny sanctuary of broken steel would collapse over them. She didn't know why she cared whether he lived, but something in his eyes said he understood the same truth. Whatever they were before this moment, right now they only had each other. A distant rumble shook the ground, dust drifting down in lazy spirals as the world above shifted. He grabbed her arm, gently, almost asking permission, before pulling her deeper into the ruins. The gesture stunned her. He didn't speak her language, but his urgency was clear. Move or die. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked in the dim light, and she felt something sharp twist inside her. Fear, yes, but also a flicker of trust she couldn't explain. As they climbed over broken machines and torn cables, she realized the strangest truth of all. He was guiding her through danger, not toward it. They stopped beneath a fractured wall where a thin beam of cold light slipped through the metal. She leaned against it, lungs on fire, trying to steady herself. He hovered nearby, torn between keeping distance and keeping watch. Outside, the war roared. Voices, engines, alarms. Yet inside this small pocket of wreckage, a strange calm settled. She felt it first, the sense that something had shifted between them. Something quiet but undeniable. He wasn't just an enemy. He wasn't just a threat. He was another living thing fighting for breath in a world designed to break them both. And for the first fragile moment, she didn't feel alone. By dawn, the ruins had turned silent, too silent. She stepped out first, her repaired mask hissing with every breath, and noticed him lingering in the shadows, as if the daylight itself might burn him. For a moment, neither moved. Then he followed, each step slow and careful, the air grinding against his lungs. She realized he wasn't tracking her as a target. He was trailing her like someone afraid of what would happen if he stopped. As they crossed the wasteland toward the dome, she watched him fight the atmosphere with every inhale. Yet he didn't turn back. Something unspoken tethered them. A fragile choice in a world choking on fear. And the strangest part was how natural it felt. The dome rose like a glass heart pulsing in the dead landscape, its surface flickering with reflected sunlight. She approached cautiously, knowing the sensors would detect him before they detected her. He slowed, breath ragged, staring at the sealed world that would suffocate him within minutes. Yet he didn't step away. She hesitated at the gate, torn between safety and a pull she didn't understand. When she looked back, he gave a small nod as if telling her to go. But the quiet tremble in his stance said something else. He didn't want her to disappear behind walls he could never enter, and suddenly she couldn't bear the thought of leaving him out here alone. The gate hissed open long enough for her to slip inside, but she didn't move. Instead, she reached out, just enough for him to see the gesture through the shifting air. He froze, the conflict in his eyes raw and open. Then, with painful effort, he stepped closer. The change was immediate. Earth's atmosphere thinned further near the dome, making his lungs shudder violently. She watched him double over, instinct pushing her forward despite every warning. Through the glass-like barrier, their hands nearly touched, separated by a breath and a world. She didn't know what she was asking. She just knew he wasn't meant to be on the outside anymore. When the outer sensors flared red, she panicked and hit the manual override, causing the airlock to expand just enough to form a narrow neutral zone. Deadly for both of them if they stayed too long. He stumbled inside, exhaling a shaky breath that fogged the translucent walls. For a heartbeat, everything felt suspended. The alarms, the danger, the world outside. She guided him deeper into the chamber, her fingers brushing his arm in a moment so small it felt accidental, yet it sent a strange warmth spiraling through her. He looked at her with something fierce and vulnerable tangled together, as if this was the first place he'd ever felt seen. The air hissed around them, thin, unstable, borrowed. But for now, it held. Inside the dome, the world softened. Filtered lights, stable air, quiet mechanical hums. She led him through back corridors where few dared to wander, her heart pounding with every step. He walked close, one hand tracing the smooth walls as if memorizing a place he was never meant to see. For the first time since meeting him, she felt something like hope bloom behind her ribs, fragile but real. She didn't know what came next, discovery, punishment, danger, but she could feel a pull growing stronger between them, something that made every stolen breath worth the risk. And as the chamber door slid shut behind them, she wondered if this moment would be the one that changed everything. The air inside the hidden chamber shimmered faintly, a fragile blend of atmospheres she had hurried to stabilize. He stood at the threshold like someone about to cross into a dream he wasn't sure he deserved. The room hummed softly, its filters struggling to weave a space where neither would suffocate. She watched him step inside, shoulders tense, breath shallow, but determined. Instinct told her to keep distance, yet something warmer urged her closer. He reached out, touching the air itself, as if testing a new world, his expression shifting from pain to something close to wonder. She felt her own breath catch, slow, steady, unfamiliar. Maybe survival wasn't the only reason they were here. Maybe they were learning how to exist together, one shared inhale at a time. He moved carefully through the chamber, each breath a negotiation between fear and hope. She showed him how to adjust the vents, her hands trembling only slightly as she guided the controls. The lights flickered, casting ripples of color across his skin, highlighting the places where strain still clung to him. When he finally breathed without flinching, her heart tightened. She hadn't expected the relief, the warmth that rose when he looked at her with gratitude he couldn't put into words. Outside, the world roared and tore itself apart. But here, just for a moment, They existed in a pocket untouched by war. She wondered how long they could hold on to it. The chamber lights dimmed to the rhythm of their synchronized breathing, a soft pulse echoing through the walls. She sat on the floor, back against a warm panel, letting the filtered air ease the ache in her lungs. He lowered himself beside her, cautious but close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence. Silence settled between them, gentle, unthreatening. She studied the exhaustion tugging at his posture, realizing he was risking more than she'd understood. He wasn't just adapting to her world, he was choosing it. When his shoulder brushed hers, the contact was small, but it felt like a promise neither of them knew how to name. She noticed a tremor in his breathing, a subtle stutter that shouldn't have been there. Without thinking, she moved closer, checking the vents, the readings, the color of the air around them. He watched her with a mix of worry and trust, letting her fuss despite his attempts to appear strong. When she placed a hand against his chest to feel the rhythm of his breathing, his eyes widened, a soft shock passing through him. She didn't pull back. The warmth beneath her palm was steady, alive, and strangely comforting. For the first time, she felt the distance between their worlds shrink, not through survival but connection. The chamber hissed as the final adjustments settled, creating a fragile equilibrium. Air for her, air for him. They stood facing each other, the soft glow turning their shadows into a single shape stretched across the wall. He raised a hand slowly, giving her time to refuse, but she didn't move. When his fingers brushed her wrist, the touch was delicate, almost reverent. She stepped closer, feeling the steady warmth of his breath mixing with hers in the narrow space between them. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't safe, but it was theirs. And when they exhaled together, she felt something shift. Like the beginning of a story neither of them had been allowed to imagine. Night settled over the chamber in a heavy hush, broken only by the hum of the failing vents. She noticed the flicker first, an unstable pulse in the consoles that shouldn't have been there. He moved beside her, alert, sensing danger before she could name it. When she pulled open a hidden panel in the wall, a sealed data core rolled out, old and dust-covered, marked with symbols she didn't recognize. His expression tightened as he brushed the surface, a faint glow responding to his touch. Something ancient stirred in the air. Fear. Memory. Something buried. Together they unlocked the core, and the projection bloomed across the room. Collapsing skies, engineered storms, a voice declaring both species unfit to survive unless controlled. Her heart pounded as the truth hit. No one stole their air. Someone had taken it from them. The recording shifted, revealing diagrams, timelines, and a signature she had never seen. A symbol of a species neither human nor alien. His breath hitched as he recognized the markings, something whispered only in his people's oldest legends. She felt a chill spread down her spine. If these figures had engineered the collapse, then everything, war, fear, masks, borders, had been built on their manipulation. Her hands shook as she reached into the flickering light, tracing images of worlds shriveled into emptiness. He looked at her then, not as an enemy, not even as an ally, but as someone who shared the same stolen sky. The ground beneath their beliefs broke open, leaving them suspended between past lies and a future none of their leaders had ever intended them to see. They watched the final message unfold, a warning, not for war, but for silence. The hidden species had vanished, leaving both worlds to fight over scraps of air they were never meant to lose. She sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. He knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the present. For a moment, the chamber felt too small for the truth they had uncovered. Outside, alarms began to echo faintly through the dome, pulling them back to reality. She met his gaze, seeing fear and resolve mirrored in his eyes. They didn't have time to mourn the lost truth. They had to decide what to do with it. Before they could move, the chamber door exploded inward, sending metal shards across the floor. She was thrown back, her mask cracking against the wall as figures stormed in. Soldiers she recognized, faces she trusted, but their eyes were cold, fixed on the alien beside her. They shouted orders she couldn't process, pulling her away from him as he reached for her with a desperate, futile grip. She tried to explain, tried to show them the truth, but they silenced her with restraints and fear-driven urgency. The air thinned in the chaos, each breath harder than the last. All she could see was his face as they dragged him toward the exit, pain and betrayal twisting across his expression. In that moment, she realized this wasn't a rescue. This was a capture. They forced her into a sealed corridor, alarms crying overhead as the dome's defenses powered up. She pounded against the glass barrier, shouting words swallowed by sirens, begging them to stop. Through the fractured view, she saw him shoved into a containment pod, its interior filled with burning air he could barely endure. His face pressed against the barrier, eyes searching for her until the pod sealed with a cruel hiss. She felt something inside her break. Something deeper than fear. They were going to tear them apart and bury the truth along with him. As the pod lifted toward the upper decks, she whispered a promise he couldn't hear, a vow shaped by breath and desperation. She would find him, no matter what it cost. The cell was colder than any air she had breathed, a place designed to quiet the mind and break the spirit. She sat against the wall, her mask repaired only enough to keep her conscious. Each inhale sharpened thin. Outside the reinforced door, voices murmured about containment, threat levels, and classified information. They didn't understand what she had seen, what they both had seen. She pressed her palms to her temples, replaying the moment he was taken, the terror in his eyes echoing through her chest. Every second felt like a countdown she couldn't read. She wasn't afraid of dying in this cage. She was afraid of what he might be facing alone, in a world that saw him as nothing more than a weapon to dissect or destroy. He woke to burning air, every breath a battle that clawed at his lungs. Chains pinned him to a vertical frame, the room around him humming with machines built to measure pain more than understand it. Human scientists moved in the background, their voices distant, clinical, debating how long he could survive without intervention. He closed his eyes, trying to steady himself, but her face rose like a memory he couldn't shake. Her fear, her hands reaching for him as they tore them apart. He wasn't afraid of pain. He was afraid she believed he had abandoned her. Through the haze, he tried to focus on anything that felt real, anything that reminded him of the breath they had once shared. It was the only thing keeping him conscious. A sudden hiss filled her cell, followed by a jolt of panic as her mask alarms flared red. The oxygen mix was collapsing, the air thinning faster than she could compensate. She staggered to her feet, hitting the door with both fists, coughing between gasps. Whether it was malfunction or punishment, she didn't know, but she refused to die here. As darkness crept along the edges of her vision, she braced herself against the wall and forced slow, steady breaths, willing her body to hold on. Somewhere beyond this suffocating chamber, he was fighting too. If either of them fell now, the truth they carried would die with them. She clenched her jaw, eyes burning, and pushed through the dizziness. She wasn't ready to give up, not when he was still out there. Deep in the facility, he stopped struggling when he felt the shift, the faint vibration in the air that signaled a system's failure somewhere nearby. It tugged at a memory, that trembled at a memory, the tremble in her breath when she was in danger. His pulse spiked, instincts overriding exhaustion. With a sudden, fierce surge, he strained against the restraints, muscles shaking as sparks flared from the frame. The scientists shouted, alarms cascading through the lab as his system spiked beyond predicted limits. Pain lanced through him, bright and hot, but the image of her collapsing under failing air pushed him forward. Metal groaned. Something cracked. He didn't know if he could break free. He only knew he had to try. The corridor lights flickered out, plunging her cell into darkness just as the door override clicked. She stumbled forward, heart racing, expecting guards. But instead, the hall was empty, bathed in emergency red. Every instinct screamed at her to run. She followed the alarms, navigating the twisting passages until she reached a viewport overlooking the upper decks. There, suspended in a cradle of wires and containment fields, pulsed the broadcast tower, its screens flashing with data from the ancient core. Someone had triggered it. Someone had released the truth. Images of engineered atmospheres lit the entire facility, spreading across every display. A shockwave of realization slammed through her. The world finally knew, and somewhere inside this chaos, he was still fighting to reach her. Chaos swallowed the dome as alarms wailed across every level, each pulse shaking the floor beneath her feet. She pushed through panicked crowds, the air thick with fear and sudden understanding. People stared at the screens around them, proof that the war had been built on a lie. Yet confusion tore at their voices. She didn't have time to watch the world unravel. Somewhere in this storm of breaking truths, he was still trapped, still struggling against air that burned him with every breath. She felt his absence like a hand around her ribs. As she sprinted toward the research wing, smoke drifted through the corridors, shadows flickering like ghosts. The world was changing, collapsing, awakening, and she was running straight into its heart to find him. He collapsed to his knees the moment the restraint snapped, air searing his lungs as he fought to stay conscious. The lab around him was abandoned, scientists fleeing the spreading panic, leaving him alone in a haze of sparks and broken machinery. He dragged himself upright using the cracked frame, every muscle trembling. The truth on the screens cut through the pain like a blade. He recognized the symbols instantly, the ghosts of stories meant to warn his people of ancient enemies long forgotten. But he didn't linger on fear. Her face filled his thoughts, steadying him. He staggered toward the exit, stumbling into the corridor where alarms echoed like distant thunder. The world might be falling apart, but as long as he could breathe, he would find her. They nearly collided at the intersection of two collapsing corridors, the roar of failing generators shaking dust from the ceiling. She froze when she saw him, breath stalling in disbelief. He looked wrecked, exhausted, burned by the air, yet alive, standing only because his determination refused to let him fall. She rushed forward, catching him before he crumpled. For a moment neither spoke. Their breaths tangled in the narrow space between them, a fragile tether pulling them back from the chaos. Then he lifted his head, eyes blazing with something fierce and unbroken. They didn't need words. The world outside shattered with every passing second. But right here, in the center of ruin, they had found each other again. They pushed through the collapsing facility, each step a battle against smoke, alarms, and the unstable air mixture that grew thinner with every passing minute. He leaned on her, but she could feel his strength surging in sharp bursts, fueled by the need to protect her, to reach safety together. A massive blast rocked the floor ahead, sending a wave of hot wind down the corridor. She stumbled, her mask slipping as cracks spread across its surface. He caught her instantly, pulling her close as the air burned around them. She could feel him trembling, feel the fire in his lungs. Desperation tightened in her chest. They weren't going to make it unless they found clean air soon. Air both of them could survive. They collapsed beside a fractured support pillar, the world around them fading into smoke and distant screams. Her mask gave a final sputter before falling silent, and her breath hitched, thin and failing. He pulled her close, panic trembling through him as he realized she couldn't survive another minute in this broken air. Without thinking, he pressed his forehead to hers, steadying his breath as if willing his strength into her lungs. She felt the warmth of him, the steady rise and fall he fought so hard to maintain. Instinct guided her, trust, desperate and raw. She leaned into him, breathing in the faint traces of his filtered exhale. Their breaths mingled, shaky, but shared. A fragile bridge between life and loss. And in that moment, as the dome shuddered around them, something shifted. Something new. Something alive, born in the space between one breath and the next. The dawn broke in fractured beams through the ruined dome, each golden thread cutting through the smoke as if trying to stitch the world back together. She leaned against him, breath still unsteady, but alive, held together by shared air and stubborn hope. Around them, humans and aliens alike stumbled through the debris, united in confusion rather than fear. The broadcasts had reached every city, every outpost, every ship in orbit. The lie was dead. For the first time, their two worlds looked at each other without the thick fog of history between them. She tightened her grip on his arm, feeling the tremble in his breath. Their survival wasn't enough. They had to rebuild what had been stolen from them: air, trust, and the right to breathe freely. They found the central stabilizer deep beneath the dome, a forgotten machine meant to regulate the atmosphere before the collapse. Its panels glowed weakly, struggling under decades of neglect. She wiped dust from the controls while he examined the cracked conduits, their movements synchronized by urgency more than understanding. If they could reawaken the system, even partially, it could stabilize the air long enough for both species to survive the coming hours. She met his gaze across the console, eyes tired but steady. Their breaths matched in quiet determination. The world above them was waiting, gasping, hoping, and they were the only ones left who knew what needed to be done. When the machine roared to life, the floor trembled as clean currents of air surged upward, spiraling toward the shattered dome. She felt the shift immediately, her chest expanding more easily, the burning sting fading from her lungs. He inhaled, eyes widening as the oxygen no longer scorched him. For a moment, they simply stood there, stunned, letting the new atmosphere wash over them. Above, distant shouts echoed with relief rather than fear. But just as hope bloomed, a deep, metallic groan rippled through the earth. The stabilizer wasn't built to run at full strength after so many years. It was breaking itself apart. She reached for his hand, anchoring them both. If this was the breath of a new world, they would have to protect it. Together, they raced back toward the surface, the ground shaking beneath their feet as the old machinery strained to hold the new atmosphere steady. When they emerged into the open air, they found crowds gathered. Humans and aliens standing shoulder to shoulder, staring at the sky as the first clear breeze in years rolled across the scarred landscape. People removed their masks. Others lowered their helmets. For the first time, both species breathed the same air without pain, without fear. She looked at him, seeing awe soften the lines of exhaustion on his face. This wasn't just survival. This was rebirth. And although the future carried scars, they were no longer alone on opposite sides of a poisoned sky. They walked to the highest point of the ruined dome, where the wind flowed clean and new, carrying the promise of a world no longer divided by breath. She removed her mask fully for the first time, feeling the air settle warm and gentle in her lungs. He inhaled beside her, unshielded, without pain. Their worlds had tried to erase each other, tried to bury them under fear and lies. But somehow, against every warning, they had found something neither species had ever understood. A breath shared freely. She reached for his hand and he clasped it with quiet certainty. As the horizon brightened, she knew this wasn't an ending. It was the first inhale of something new, something alive, something worth rebuilding from the ashes.